maybe wait. And I haven't heard a word from Mr. Mackey. All righty. Is there any public comment from the committee? Okay. Any board announcements? I don't have any. All righty. So can I get a motion to approve the September 27th minutes?
So moved.
For a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
No, I thought they were very helpful, very thorough. Thank you. It reminded me of everything I said I would do. I just want to make sure you didn't add anything you were going to do over to what I was going to do.
Okay,
Thank you.
Who was the second one then? I'm sorry.
Katie?
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 No? Any opposed? Okay, none. All righty, so we're into our discussion items, and the first one is, does anybody have any responses from the committee or boards that they were going to touch base with?
I will say, I did have a quick conversation with Steve Walker. I had been waiting for the email to go out, so I got a late start. But I saw Steve Walker from the PAC last night, and he said that he had taken a look at the charter. He doesn't anticipate that they'll have anything that they're going to want to suggest, but it's too soon to say. So I just said that I would be happy to go to their next meeting, and I'll probably follow up with an email. As far as the Cultural Council goes, I haven't been able to find them. They are not on the website. I'm not sure who the chairperson is. Do you know?
Well, I had trouble finding open space contact, and so I emailed Heather, and Elaine sent me the contact. So
Right, that was what I was going to do next, was, but I see that all of their activity is on the Mass Cultural Council website, but nothing on the Lunenburg website, so. And then the Finance Committee, it's on our agenda for tomorrow night for discussion.
Let me just interrupt that there was probably one announcement that I should have made. We made a decision at the very last minute to televise this meeting because we're here in Town Hall. So we didn't give PAC a lot of notice, and they're doing the best they can, and hopefully we're going out live. But I should mention that we're being recorded and broadcast, hopefully on live PAC, and we will, as usual, be available on YouTube. Anyway, okay, I'm sorry. Does anybody else have a report on their committee work?
Sure. For the APD, I contacted Jim, and he had a question if there was a preferred timeline of involvement, which I thought was a good question in terms of, we're just initially asking them, but is there a timeline we want them to sort of respond by, or, so I didn't know.
I think at our last meeting, we were supposed to come up with the timeline for all the phases, and I don't think that we got around to that. But I think the idea was probably within the next month.
I think there's kind of three answers to that. If they want us to go to any of us to go to their meetings, that's going to play into a timeline, because when is their next meeting? If they want to come and join us, which is certainly a possibility, either their whole committee or a spokesperson, we will schedule that as well. And then if they have nothing, then just check off the box that we've touched base with them. So I think it's a good answer is within the next month or so, because that allows for all those possibilities.
I emailed my 4 people. Everybody got back to me, but no input yet. They needed a little more time.
Okay. I contacted my 3 assignments, and each of them wanted to discuss it at their next meeting. And then they were going to let me know if they wanted to have either me join the meeting after that, or whether they wanted to come here. So it's kind of work in progress, but I do expect a response from all 3 within another meeting cycle, which is probably, in most cases, no more than a month, or probably 2 weeks.
So far, the feedback I've received, we have one comment from the planning board. It's very specific. So it comes from Mr. Allison. It says that any regular or special town meeting should be announced such that there are a minimum of X number of weeks for the public to participate as a legislative body before a town meeting, such as like 2, 3, 6 weeks. And then his note was that the announcement and the closing of the town warrant, cuts down participation to the meeting. And so his request is that the town members should be afforded more time to be able to respond.
What's our plan to kind of collect this input? It's going to be in the minutes, obviously, but do we have a game plan or should we be discussing that as an action item?
I think we should discuss that as an action item. Maybe we could create ourselves some form of document that says this is the response we got back from this committee. I can template that to make it something that's really simple.
I was also thinking about if there was a way to break the charter into specific categories, like 10 categories or 8 categories, and then, because I was also thinking of comparing bylaws to the charter and where there might be overlap or discrepancy, but being able to do that in the context of like a certain grouping, like create a grouping. So when you look into, like in this case, identifying, town meeting or special town meeting and looking into those particulars, one thing I noticed is the bylaw closes at 5 p.m. on such a day, and then the charter has it at 4 p.m. on such a day. So it's 2 different times for the same process. But then being able to say, like, after reviewing this specific category, these are the things we might need to tweak. So I wasn't sure if that might make it easier to discuss it all, if we break it into group, like categorize, like a specific amount of
That would also,
categories.
well, I would
Better way to
suggest
say
too
that.
that would, if we do try to discuss it in that type of a format, it would make it easier to determine if people are interested in particular areas. Certainly for the Finance Committee, when I sent out our agenda, and I sent out the charter for them to review it in advance of the meeting, I told them to highlight the sections that the Finance Committee was in and all of Section 6, because it's all finance. So yeah, I think there is something about, if people want to talk about what type of town meeting setup government, yeah. I don't know how easily it splits into that, probably very easily. Certainly elected bodies and form of government is probably a good.
If you want, before next meeting, I can go through the charter and try to come up with what would feel like categories in it. And then we can maybe see if that would make sense so that we can discuss specific, and that might, like you said, appeal to certain groups, like we are interested in one thing for, the charter is just
It's so
one
big, yeah.
big thing.
It's a buffet.
It is. Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea.
Okay.
And then I think the other, that wasn't a response was certainly, because I don't know where to put the feedback from, even if I'm going through and I'm searching on, trying to find out why some towns who still have open meeting do well and we don't. It would be just interesting to figure out, like how that fits in with what we're talking about. Because certainly and I'm probably jumping ahead, but certainly when we talk about the schedule of town meeting, so far in my searches, I've only ever found one other town that meets on Saturday and it's in the afternoon. So which is interesting. Everybody else seems to like Mondays and Tuesdays and additional nights. So, which I find I found it interesting that there were so many open town meeting towns.
But maybe that's, I don't want to jump ahead to what Katie's volunteered to do, but like a category on meeting time schedules or days of the week or how long or how many weeks notice or those kind of things might be a category.
Right.
Elected versus appointed may be a category. Some of the things we brought up in our brainstorming the first night.
Right.
And then as we get either suggestions or input, like we got from the planning board, we could at least put them in those categories, and then as we work towards having these subgroups, maybe we have a subgroup attack each of the work on each of the categories or something of that nature.
Yeah, it sounds good to me.
Like town
Yeah.
meeting makes a good category.
Right.
So anything that falls under that
Right.
would be dealt with, yeah.
Right, and I think that's where you get into your form of government and,
Right.
those types of, yeah.
So did anybody, the next item is representative town government. And I think that's one where we're going to review other towns and try to figure out what different people did. I didn't think we were expected to get that all done by this meeting. But
No.
anybody get anything started?
No, and I'm not sure that, given that this only happens once every 10 years, I think given the initial discussions about, like, well, what if we tried to really try to beef up the people coming before we change the nature of the form of government? Yeah, I don't see how we could be there already, because we haven't done anything in terms of polling the town. We haven't done anything in terms of talking about dates and times for the meeting and why it works in some places and not here. And sometimes it does work here, and maybe all we have to do is put a 2.5 override on every single town meeting agenda.
It certainly is topic specific. I mean,
Yeah.
when we had a controversial topic, we had better attendance.
Right, right. But it could also be that as like certainly for people who can't make a Saturday morning, then I think we tend to, I'm not sure that we've ever had a quorum issue with a special town meeting. I think we have with regular town meeting. And again, that's a night meeting versus a day meeting. So,
I think my take from the last meeting was the same, that we're going to kind of explore playing with the times. But what do we currently think about representative town government? I mean, what is our current feel?
my sense is that it might be premature to discuss it without hearing from the town, whether or not why it is that they're not coming. And if it's a time issue, rather than cut someone's capacity off to vote by going to representative town meeting, I think my other concern would be, since we have trouble having people run for offices currently, although I don't know how frequently town meeting meets in representative town meeting kind of structures, but we'd have to then identify how many town meeting members you want, and you'd still have to have 50 people willing to run for an office. So,
I think that's a good point, is how would you even fill those seats? And even last night's meeting with maybe how many people were invited versus how many people came. And I think there was a lot more people just on the boards and committees that didn't come, just even in thinking of that as our representative group already. And only a small sliver came to that. Like, it doesn't necessarily lend itself to meaning that there'll be more involvement when you restrict it. It almost seems counterintuitive.
well, not necessarily, but I think it's, again, I think it's almost premature to have that discussion. Just because we haven't found a way to try to get a sense of, one, I think that, to me, it would be an educational outreach to talk about, okay, this is Lunenburg, this is the form of government in Lunenburg, this is what it means, this is what operating a town government takes, this is, you have all these committees that actually run things, and given all of that, and given your role as an active participant, why aren't you coming to town meeting? And was it that you didn't know that that's what happened there? Was it that, because the town election follows? So some of the things that are voted on at town meeting is just to bring it forward to the town election. I don't know what the participation rate is for town election. And maybe that's another question, is what's the participation rate for that? And I have to say that, yeah, it would be nice to be able to have a start and an end time for town meeting, but you just can't count on that. But certainly you could say, okay, we're going to go from 9 to 12, and if we're not finished by 12, we're going to have to schedule to go Monday night at 6. So that you're already going into it with that, this is when the next part might be. So we haven't played with any of that, and I think initially my thought was representative town meeting was the way to go, and I have to say that listening to some people, it might be premature, because we'd have to wait another 10 years to change it, because it's the charter. So that's how I feel about it, but I'll stop now. So other people may also feel.
I guess my response to you, I agree with your opinion, but I don't think it does any harm to find out what other towns do, just so we...
Oh, no, I think
Yeah,
that's
right,
still,
right.
yes, I'm not saying we don't do that. I guess what I'm saying is that I'm not sure that we discuss until we have those findings from other towns, and, find out if we did thus and such, would participation improve.
Because I almost think it would be helpful to find out, and there's so many variables, this is tough, but to find out how many towns have representative, how many towns meet on Saturdays versus weeknights, et cetera. And then the next question that just flows out of that is, how many of them feel that they're being successful, that they're getting enough participation, or whatever their definition of success is?
Right, and I think that the other thing that can be gotten, and I'm not sure how best to get this, would be the number of voters attending
Right.
at any town meeting. The other thing that I found interesting was there's a lot of towns that actually put their town meeting minutes up on the website, and we don't. And I found that interesting, so that people don't even know what it was that happened if they didn't go, which is,
And yet we do have the videotape and YouTube that's available.
and
It just seems like an enormous task to do. I guess you have to make minutes.
well, yeah, the minutes, the town clerk has to do the minutes, so
Right.
you might as well publish them. But it was also, there was a lot of things I found on a lot of websites that were very interesting in terms of encouraging participation, whether it was, like videos or documents on what town meeting was, what it meant, what the structure was, this is how you make a motion, this is how you the phrase, "I doubt it," and, at what point you would use it, when is it appropriate, how is it appropriate? So educationally, they're reaching out to their folks. There's also, I think it was Tingsboro in particular, had, when they send the warrant out, it does have language about, this means that $20,000 will go to, right. And it has the warrant article, it has the selectmen, the finance committee, and the "this means" box, and that's posted, and it's really very easy to read. So I think that there's probably more work for those of us who really don't have time to do it, to really try to, if we believe that this is the way to go. I think that the educational piece comes first, the feedback from people comes, and then also mixing it in with the information from the other towns. And it would be good, I think, and I don't know if it's that we can use the town moderator or the town clerk to get feedback from other towns in terms of attendance at town meeting, attendance of voters at town meeting.
And I wonder too, when you do the mailing, almost having it read more like an invitation, like, please join us at, because what is this piece of information that just got mailed to me? Is it just something I recycle? But almost like a,
Yeah.
please join us at the,
Well, the warrant has, it's got to meet some legal, it's like, it has to say this, and warrant means you are warned.
like
You are
another
warned
flyer
that
or
these things are
something,
going to happen.
like a
Right.
letter, like a Dear Lunenburg, please join us.
Right.
With some more of that sort of angle towards using lay language, and if somebody doesn't understand what the warrant is coming to them for.
Right.
What that means.
And I think if it's likely, too, that we're going to continue to have fall town meetings, whether they're special, or there are some towns that don't call them special town meetings. They have an annual town meeting and a subsequent town meeting. And they know that it's always going to be in the fall, so you always know that if there's something that might come up, you know that you start preparing your warrant articles, so that when the warrant opens and the warrant closes, you've had adequate time to put something together. Which I thought was interesting. It's like, STM could stand for anything.
Last fall, I did a direct mailing for my business, and it was the first time doing that. And a couple of things shocked me. First of all, it's really cheap. I had no idea just how cheap it is to mail postcards to a lot of people in Lunenburg. And I didn't pick all the different zones. I only picked a few based on, the route that we were advertising for us for snow. But I think, one of the things I mentioned last night, and I think it's really important, is I think it's on us as individuals to do some campaigning. I think that the campaigning process is positive because, as I noted last night, but I'll mention it here. I think it's positive because it makes people aware that this position even exists. It makes people aware of what the organizational function is of that board or that committee, and I think that it does spark interest. It is unfortunate that more people aren't informed, but I've lived in this town for a long time, and certainly. I didn't know the difference between, the finance committee and what was the other? What's another one? There was the finance committee. Then there was capital planning.
Oh, capital
And I-
planning,
Yeah,
right,
I didn't
right.
know what really the difference was between those two committees. We talk about economic development. Most other communities have an economic development separate entity within the town. In our town, it's a function of the Board of Selectmen and a function of the Planning Board, and it's piecemealed, to a lot of other town manager, and it kind of goes all over the place. So I think that just the process of going out there, sending out mailings, saying, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, I think that that's really critical to help also get away from the perception that, oh, this is a town, the people who are involved have been involved for the last 40 years, all their parents were involved, their kids are going to be involved, and it's a closed network. When in reality, what I'm, more aware of is that I think that, we have a lot of humble servants, who are like, hey, how do we get more people in here? I think a lot of people are boggled down, not boggled, but are tasked heavily to a lot of different boards, a lot of different committees, and, that mailing becomes just, why do I need to send this out? But I think it's necessary to do. And I think that would, and I really believe that would increase participation. Give people something to support or something to be against.
Yeah, I think that works for, and I think that's the other thing that there's confusion about is which boards are elected and which boards are appointed. And say, for example, the Finance Committee, you're appointed, and you're not even appointed by the Board of Selectmen, it's a whole different appointing process. And the good news about being on the Finance Committee is you're not allowed to be on another committee unless you're appointed to be the representative of the Finance Committee on that other committee. Otherwise, I could see, like, people getting sucked into, oh, there's a vacancy here, there's a vacancy here. I mean, I remember Ernie Sund used to be on like 5 different committees at the same time. So, but yeah, I think that certainly getting the word out that there's vacancies and people needing to fill them, I think that's a good thing to do. And again, splitting into the different types of committees that there are. And actually, I think that the other thing we should find out is why the Council on Aging never is short of volunteers. Because,
And why is ZBA? The ZBA seems to be well-stocked and people waiting in the wings. It's kind of interesting, but
right,
they're the two that we never have to go begging for.
right.
And it would be worth, doing a little exploration.
Right.
I think
I'm going to make a suggestion, though. We're brainstorming right now, which is fine. But I see us dancing through
and many
B, C, and D, and I don't want to miss anything. So if I can make the suggestion that we go through the agenda and whatever we miss, then we can brainstorm at the end, if that's...
That's fine, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. And I think we're going to be doing a certain amount of brainstorming at every meeting, so I might even suggest that we put it on the agenda at every meeting, kind of near the end.
Okay.
That we say, just a brainstorming session, something you thought of. Because the next item is Board of Selectmen. And the issue there is, again, we're putting everything on the table. Some towns call it a select board. And originally, that was only a gender thing. It was, why do you call them selectmen if you have female candidates or female members? But I think some towns have taken a nuance beyond that, and it's a select board as opposed to Board of Selectmen for other reasons, and I'd like to do a little research on that. The other thing is the number of members on the Board of Selectmen. Okay, the most traditionals are 3 or 5, but I think it's worth a discussion. And it's on the agenda, so I just wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, that's my thought as well on that. I think that the name Selectmen, it's a male-focused name, and I think we're in a different time, and I think that it's not reasonable for women to assume a role and be called a man. It sets a certain expectation that says men do these roles, and when women do them, they're called men. And I think we can do better.
I agree. However, I don't disagree at all, full stop. However, when you say the select board, it almost sounds elitist on the other side of the coin, and yet the word selectman is a term of art in the state.
It is.
So, we have to,
I wonder about select members.
something, whatever.
Well, actually, it's funny because, like Mark always said select board.
Right.
And so,
And I'm fine with it, and we react to it,
yeah,
but it's just, that's not what it's,
called,
In the
yeah,
charter.
there are, it's the Board of Selectmen.
and I don't think we have to beat that to death, but is it worth adding to our survey of other towns? And
Oh, sure.
our data collection and everything else.
I think so.
Yeah, it would be interesting to find out why Mark calls it the select board.
No, I have a very strong
Well,
feeling
that's-
that 5 is way better than 3.
Oh, yeah, I think that, yeah, 5 is definitely better
And
than
I
3.
don't know of any that have more than 5, but, you know.
If we call it a select board, what does somebody identify with themselves as? Just a select
member of the
man or
select board.
a member? Because that feels long.
Well, yeah, I know, but that's, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe you can call it a select woman. Yeah. But I think that you're open to do that when it's not called a selectman.
Yeah, what are you running for? You're running for a seat on the Board of Selectmen, or you're running for a seat on the Select Board, so, yeah.
You know, the whole thing sometimes becomes a matter of personal preference. I mean, when we use the formality of Mr. and Ms. and Mrs., and when we do Madam Chair versus Mr. Chair, you know, what we do on our board is ask people what their preference is. And both of our female selectmen have said that they prefer to be addressed as Mrs. So that's what we use. But that's not in the charter, it's just their preference. You know,
Right.
and the same thing, I always felt kind of weird calling somebody Madam Chair. But if you call them Mr. Chair, that's where you go next. Unless we get a better way to do this.
Just chair.
Yeah. Well, then you feel like a piece of furniture, right?
What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that selectman is, and do you see that as a problem?
I haven't thought about this, really. I think, I don't know what other towns do, or, I like the idea of something, Board of Select or something, or Select Board or something, be fine with me, but I'd have to think about this.
Yeah,
See
I mean, it would be
what are the
interesting,
options?
to hear if there's a trend or anything going anywhere. I can't say that, you know, like, I'm offended by it. But it, you know, like, again, in terms of personal preference, I wouldn't know, and maybe I would just ask the other members of the board.
How much editing would we have to do in the bylaws and charter?
We're gonna leave it, it's fine.
Yeah,
Anyway, just kind of working our way through this.
Sure.
The other is town meeting in terms of a schedule of meeting and alternate days and times. I think we touched on that. I think that very definitely probably is going to be a part of one of our categories that Katie suggested.
And I also read about communities that have just officially established a November 1, a November meeting as just part of their, you know, natural schedule, so that everything can always happen in a certain order.
right, and I think part of the reason why that's probably happening now is because once the information comes out on new growth, that's your one shot to get it on the budget for the year, so that's probably why some towns.
Perhaps there'd be a way to waive it if it wasn't needed, but have it
Right,
sort of
right.
established as something that exists, but then if it's clearly unnecessary.
Just as a practical measure, I think having one established and saying you're going to have a fall meeting is an excellent idea. But setting a date sometimes takes the flexibility that's required, because an issue on there is waiting for some data or has to be done before a certain time. And a lot of times our flexibility, when we set the date for the specials, you know, either maybe there's a planning board item that we're waiting for them to finalize their public hearings or something, so then it would be kind of late in the cycle. Maybe there's a right of first refusal on something coming out of chapter where we have to get it done within a deadline, so we want it earlier. So there's a flexibility that is a practical issue.
I think it
But
would
I
be,
understand we might at the very least say we're always going to have a fall town meeting, and it's going to fall sometime between October 15th and November 15th or something like that. And I'm perfectly also fine with saying whenever you establish it, you need X number of weeks ahead of time to notify the public, whatever. And even if that's greater than what is required by statute.
Although the issue will then become if your concern is right of first refusal, does it give you enough time?
Exactly.
So if you want to
There's
set,
practical things that bump up against.
yeah.
I think that, the weather is certainly a factor in town meeting. That it's usually the first nice weekend where we're finally out of snow, you know, we've all finished burning our brush, and town meeting. And I think that does have an impact on participation. I know for for me this year, I think I was doing yard work, and, and that's what it came down to, is knowing that I can't burn next week, do I do it now, or do I go to town meeting? And
So Charlie should read the first rainy day.
First rainy day in May.
yeah, no, I wonder if we should actually bump it to the end of April. Because, parents are typically, and tie it around school vacation, is that's a time where people usually are around. Not everyone, but I do know that a lot of people take off time to be home with their kids at school vacation. It's before the prom season, so, I think it's a good time, my opinion, is maybe around that week, that may be a good time, or coming off of that week, after that week, because I know there's a marathon usually that Monday or something. So maybe right after school vacation, or right before, somehow tying it into that time period.
How does that play into the finance schedule that sort of already exists in the
It doesn't,
state information?
it doesn't. I know what happens is we work our way back from the town meeting. So when the town meeting is scheduled, then we go back to, okay, well, we have to have a public hearing by here, and we have to hear from the department heads, and so everything backs up to when the town manager has to present her budget. So since we do that, I don't think that would be an issue. I think, although we do sometimes run into problems with weather in the winter during the hearings, and that sometimes affects. But I think that would be an interesting thing to talk about in terms of, again, like part of the reason why nice weather is such an issue is it's a Saturday morning. And if we're doing a Monday night, does it matter? So, and then actually the nice weather is probably a good thing because it's brighter later, so people, if you schedule it for like 6 instead of 7, then, maybe you get some participation for a few hours, so, which is typical for what we get on Saturdays, and that's why at 12 o'clock, everybody's calling people to come in. So, but I think that's part of the survey, is, how do you feel about April? I don't think it would affect anything else. From us, for us anyway.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is elected boards with employees, and after further review, we realized that we have some appointed boards that have employees as well.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, so here's a situation where, well, they don't have employees. We have town employees. In all cases, they're town employees, but their job is responsible for activities that fall under a discipline that is kind of a board's responsibility. All right, and the ones that come to mind on the elected are sewer and park and cemetery, and the one that comes to mind to me anyway on appointed is PAC, and I'm trying to think if there's another. To an extent, there are committees that rely on DPW. It's not a full employee, but it's,
Right, parks.
well, Parks is one that definitely.
Oh, they're elected
definitely
anyway.
has, yeah.
They're elected anyway.
But the issue here, and it's kind of where the discussion will end up, whether it's elected or appointed, is the difference between the board and committee setting policy and the town hierarchy, probably up through the town manager, setting the day-to-day operations, so that your hiring, your firing, your performance review, your disciplinary, your increased recommendations, all that stuff is operations, if you will, but some way to have input from the board or committee or commission whose mission relies on those employees.
Okay, so for example, the library board of trustees currently votes the increase for the library director.
Correct.
So what you're suggesting is that instead of that it be a recommendation?
I'm suggesting we should discuss that.
Right.
Because is it different than the sewer commission who has a business manager who's a town employee?
Right.
Is it different than, actually, it's not our scope of responsibility, but it's worth a conversation for the town anyway. Is it different from the school board and their superintendent down through employees? All right, I think there's an operation versus a policy setting. Right, and I think that's set by law. I think MGL
Right.
says that the school board appoints the superintendent and the select board appoints the town manager. And, you
Right.
know, although there's a town manager search committee, but it's the selectmen who actually make the choice.
Right.
The hiring decision.
And it seems as though, like, even on the planning board, you know, we work with Mr. Bernie, and I mean, you know, the land use director, he's vital. He's a
Right.
vital asset, but when it comes to his own evaluation, we have no participation in that.
Right.
You know, there's no, you know, kind of cross-reference, and I think, and I'll mention, you know, my previous job, working in, before, you know, I started my own business, I was an administrator for the government, and, you know, it was a similar situation where I was, you know, you're overseeing people day to day, but someone else does their evaluations. And it was like kind of the opposite thing. And it's like, well, how, you know, I think so what you end up with is, it's almost like this duality in which the people you work with are not the people you necessarily have to work with. Because that's not, you know, you're pleasing your boss who maybe has a whole different set of goals, whole different set of objectives for you. And I think that, you know, through the, either an employee review process, you know, whatever that is, that I think maybe we should look into that and say, what's the format for how employees are being evaluated? Where do the boards provide their input into these evaluations? And then also, you know, I know this is on the agenda coming up too, is the termination process, which is, and how do we reverse this? So, you know, if we're working with, and this isn't the case for the planning, I know I mentioned Adam Burney, so I don't certainly want to make it seem as if by any means I'm referencing him, but, you know, it brings up another question though, of if you are working with an employee and you do have difficulties with them, you know, what is the process to then either get more professional development for them or for them to be terminated? And right now, there doesn't seem to be a very clear process for termination or for the boards to really even provide feedback on the performance of who they're working with.
And I think if we climbed through the charter and the bylaws, we'd find that if it's addressed at all, it's not addressed consistently.
Right, right.
All right?
It's
I
not
mean,
a-
there was a buzzword in private industry called matrix management a while back. I'm not sure if it's still
yeah.
important, but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's, you know, either having two bosses or having one boss that, you know, kind of influences your career and the other one who actually you report to.
So that feels like a category.
Yeah,
little bit.
I think I probably make the category operation versus policy setting, and then just make a note that includes employees. Because there's some other areas where, you know, when does the actual execution, maybe the employee's doing a fine job, but you know, who's responsible for the execution of a board or committee's plan?
And I'd be willing to, you know, explore how other communities are evaluating their employees, and then trying to come up with some different ideas, templates that we can say, yeah, this is a great format that we can use and that works.
The other thing is that you're going to know much more about the whole contract issue as it relates to employees within the town and who they have to answer to. So I don't know whether that becomes a personnel committee or a Board of Selectmen having the most, I guess, knowledge about how that works.
See, it's not even the Board of Selectmen. I mean, the Board of Selectmen.
I mean, basically, we don't sit in on contract
we
negotiations.
ratify that stuff.
Right,
The town manager actually does it.
right, so she writes the
And the
contracts.
town meeting appropriates the money,
Right,
or at least the first year of the money,
right,
on all the contracts. And the town meeting approves the salary administration plan, which covers all the non-union employees, or the people, or anybody not covered by collective bargaining.
Right, but collective bargaining rules the evaluation process.
Oh, yeah.
So it would be, I guess, not having information
Oh,
on
as
those
opposed to the
contracts.
charter.
I have a
Right,
question,
right.
because I feel like we're talking about employees very broadly, but then under E, it's elect boards with employees. So are we staying?
Well, that's what we're on, that's the topic we're on right
Okay,
now.
and so it's just specifically then a small group of people we're actually talking about?
I don't know many employees that don't fall underneath a board or a committee.
Right,
Yeah, I think that's a verbiage, but I think they all do. With the-
Right, so that's what I'm kind of wondering, then it's really just saying employees.
Minus school department, because they seem to be autonomous.
Well,
they have their own contract, and
Yeah.
they have their own, what people are responsible for what, but it's the same thing that, okay, so the library board of trustees, if they oversee the library director, and the library director is overseeing the staff,
I think this is an area where the town
Right.
council can help us
right?
in terms of what falls into territory that could be charter or bylaw related versus what is negotiated as a contract.
Right, and how that's addressed in the language in the charter, because
Right.
basically anything that you say here is, I assume, superseded by a contract negotiation.
Right.
So,
But I think we need to just be aware of the fact that we probably don't have a consistent approach.
and it would be nice to have one. Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And the other thing I just hit me, and maybe this goes to brainstorming, but it almost seems to me that almost anything we discuss, we probably want to find out what other towns do. And not that we're gonna go with what everybody does. We may in fact make a conscious decision that we want to do it different because we're smarter or because we have a different situation or something. But I think it's a piece of data that as we propose this and market it and talk to the town about it, it's, the first question is, what does everybody else do? So I think it's a piece of data that we ought to have. And if we're going to deviate from what everybody else does, we should be prepared to discuss why.
Okay, so then basically, should we then be looking to measure ourselves again? And maybe what we need to do is set what the baseline would be for us to look at. So if I look at a community of 12,000 people, 10 to 12,000 people, demographically somewhat similar, I don't know how that would be. I mean, basically identifying towns to compare ourselves to.
I think that works in certain areas, but I would argue that you want to emulate best in class regardless of their size if it's not something that has a reason to be size related. I mean, we can't afford things that big cities can afford. But by the same token, if it's a practice and it doesn't cost any more or less, why wouldn't we emulate whoever's doing it best?
Yeah.
Right.
Right,
And by the same token, if everybody's going one way, but we think it's better to go another way, as long as we explain to the people and they buy into that's the right decision, who cares?
right.
But I agree that we're not reinventing the wheel.
Right,
So
right.
I'm sure other people have faced the same issues, the same questions we're asking, and they've come up with some solutions, and that's a good starting point.
Yeah, I guess what's going to make it hard is to compare, unless we have some kind of a
matrix?
where are we? Okay, well, in towns that are this size, so it's like, to me, it would be nice to have something to measure against.
I went online, and there are some matrices on the state websites, that are comparative of towns, and, with different data points. But I think, some of this stuff is a little more, it's not necessarily a data point. It's a lot more detailed. But I do think that I agree that, as we approach these things, we should be assigning, hey, I'm going to follow up, look at this community, that community. Maybe a good way to go forward is that we all kind of think of a town or a city that we want to use as a source for us. And so when we have these conversations, we have an easy reference guide to go back to and say, I'm focusing on Groton, or I'm focusing on Shirley, or et cetera. So that way, there's 9 of us, so that gives us at least a good breadth of communities to kind of explore.
Okay. I just still don't know who I'm looking for. Okay, so, okay. I guess I'll just do a general search and just see if stuff starts to fall into some kind of a, but I
I
think,
do agree sticking with a population range makes sense though, because everything becomes so different if you reach a certain size and you're really dealing more with, or at least stick with people who are operating as towns, of course, like not.
right, because Framingham is a really big town.
Yes.
Right, and you have Plymouth or something operating as a town, but it's so much bigger that the way it operates might be dramatically different. Or maybe it isn't, I don't know.
But like you said, they might have good ideas that we
Yeah.
could do
Yeah.
on a smaller scale.
I think we're all kind of doing the same thing. It's just, how many personnel we can commit to it, how many specialists we all can commit to it. And I think the smaller the town, the more each individual has a lot more responsibilities.
Okay, well, I guess maybe this is the only, so basically, if we go through a whole list of all of the towns in Massachusetts and we identify whether they are open town meeting or representative or anything else, or we identify that they have a select board or a board of selectmen and how many members, or what the schedule is, when does their regular town meeting, do they have an already scheduled subsequent or special town meeting? And then go through it that way, I think that would make it a lot easier to just plot something on a spreadsheet, to me. I'm sorry, I think in spreadsheets, that's what we do on the finance committee. And then whether the town clerk is appointed or elected. And I don't know what other data point we might be looking at. But certainly this, probably including the size of the town.
It feels like that study we read.
It does.
No, it feels a lot like doing, like the study we all read in the beginning. It feels like doing that in its own way so that you're looking at each individual town with all of those points being fulfilled, which I like.
Well, I'm just looking down through the discussion items and pulling, okay, is there something else that we need to put on the spreadsheet in terms of, so if I'm trying to pull data from a town, and I go to the state, like DOR site or something, do I want to pull the demographic of, as Pete Lincoln was saying, that, like, at the next census, we're going to have more people over the age of 60 than in
Under
school
25.
age, so, and is it likely that that's still going to be true, given that there's an influx of younger people coming into town? So, who knows what's going to happen. But I don't know if demographically we want to know that, because maybe that's why you would keep a day meeting instead of going to a night meeting. I don't know. So, maybe free cookies. I mean, and if we have the meeting in October, then we can have apples, but anyway, that's just I'm happy to go and just pull a list of towns and just trying to plot those things. And if there's something else that we should be plotting, then that would be good to know too, if people have other things they think we should be looking at. So,
Okay.
and then that way, I don't know if there's a way to measure if, I don't know how to find out if they're anticipating a change in structure, or, so how to find out if there's a trend to go one way or another. Because typically you're just going to find out what they're currently doing.
Yeah.
And maybe last year was when they went to representative town meeting because they couldn't get people to town meeting, or, I don't know.
In my preliminary Google searches, I think that it's becoming a statewide issue of low attendance at town meetings. I don't think we are by any means unique in that area. And as far as why though, that's, probably something that, someone should study. My hunch is that I think the timing, and I also think it's lifestyle. I think, I'm not sure who mentioned this last night, but we are the culture does seem to be shifting, in which, having cell phones, everything's headline, short characters, and, most people aren't reading books like, we were years ago. So the idea of coming to sitting in an open-ended kind of question mark doesn't always seem very appealing.
Well, there's that, and I also think that for a town that has open town meeting as a form of government, I'm surprised that there's not more, I don't know, like in high school, if civics is covered, and, like to what extent, because I never see young kids at meetings. unless it's an Eagle Scout with a project. And certainly, it would probably be nice to be invited to go to a high school class and talk about what a different committee does, or, like what the form of government is, and gee, what's it like to stand up and, like, speak to something. And we had a lot of kids come and speak when we were doing the 2.5 override, or when there's an issue. But I think it's also, who knows, maybe that's why we don't see a lot of younger people at town meetings, is because they don't really understand, as you guys are, coming into starting your families, having your families, you're busy with the kids on Saturdays, and maybe you never really learned how important town meeting could be. I don't know. I didn't grow up in a town, sorry.
I wonder if we were discussing this, I was discussing with the chair of the planning board, and this is an ongoing thing about, I think it's really important that we get students involved. And I've approached a couple of different students, and, you tell them what planning board does, and they're like, that's boring, snore, not interested. But I wonder if, that is the approach, if maybe we should be coming up with basically a presentation in which we can spend a few days in some of the high school classrooms, and kind of when they're taking civics, and saying, this is how your town government functions, to kind of increase the knowledge and increase awareness. I think that kids go home, I don't have any children. Katie, do your kids come home and tell you what they learn in school and the things, like the cool stuff that goes on? I'm imagining that they probably do, right?
They do, yeah. They're not really into government yet, but they're learning it from me.
Yeah, they get it from, my daughter was here at the last meeting because she had to for her class. But we were at the open house, and one of the teachers said, we're in a democracy, but we don't teach it in schools. There isn't civics, and there should be. You have to be educated to run a town. You need to know what is going on, but they don't teach it, so parents have to.
And I was thinking back to my own civics, we didn't do town level government. Which, when you think of it, that's where you can have your most impact. So it's funny that it's not something that is taught.
So maybe we should, I think this is something that we should probably really explore. Maybe this is something that, we can add into the school committee of one of their expectations.
It's hard because they don't have a lot of flexibility with their curriculum.
Of course.
So even if it's something they desire to do, they're often very, very restricted by what is available for them to do as content anymore, so.
Yeah, if you want extra credit, go to a meeting and, have the chairperson sign off that you attended. I mean, it's just there's a lot of different ways to get at it. But I also think that, to me, again, it's part of that whole educational outreach piece, and what are the different ways that we can go at that.
We do have a cool system here in New England, in which we do have this town government structure that no one else in this country uses, except for us. And in order to preserve it, we have to teach it.
It's almost like a problem way beyond even at a town level when something important's not being taught.
Okay, I'm depressed.
I think these are the right discussion points. Unfortunately, I don't think the answer pops into your head.
Well, no, the answer doesn't, and I think that basically, as we're going through the whole charter review process, and once we start pushing out any kind of a survey to people, and again, I still would start with, all right, I probably should find out from, actually, could you find out from Timothy Murphy if I have broken any laws by posting the moderators of Massachusetts, whatever that association is.
It's so much easier
Don't
to beg forgiveness than to ask permission.
Well, actually, since I just shared it, I don't think it's an issue. Somebody else posted it. I just shared it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think that, and I'm happy to go through, I mean, there's a lot of resources out there that I'm happy to keep posting and sharing, and seeing if people are at least, responding to it.
I think that was an excellent presentation. I really did.
Right, and
You shared. I
Right.
thought it was great.
And I think that probably, and I think that's why I was also thinking if there's a place on social media that was not closed, because, that particular discussion group is closed. And really, the only reason I joined it was because I heard people talking about there were discussions going on there, and I was like, well, what are they talking about? So I wanted to go see. And then there's another one that's open, but I don't know who goes there. So if the town had one, and even if it was just pushing information out, I think it would be great to be putting those resources out there. And giving people a place to talk about, well, I don't know, what's this about? The other was that, and I'll go back to the whole website discussion, was, I'm sorry, I'm brainstorming.
It's okay.
I'm way off the agenda, but one of the sites that I visited, looking at town meeting information, there was a page that really got into town meeting and town boards and town committees, and was really very chatty about, this is what our structure is, this is what it involves, this is.
Do you remember what town that was?
Lexington had a link to a document that is put out by the Commonwealth on town meeting. Salisbury had a very good website. There were several. There was actually, the link was actually town meeting. I mean, you could go and click on town meeting and it would bring you up to, oh, here's our form of government, here's a video, here's, here's some pictures of people talking before the meeting. So it's like very chatty, and again, they had the agendas or the warrants for previous meetings, and they also had the minutes. And in some towns, they called it the doings, going back to very old language.
Yeah.
So it was,
I saw a lot of question and answers in that format, where you could click on a, what is a this, what is a that, how do you, in some
Right.
towns offer that sort of like Q&A.
Right,
For
right.
somebody who wants to understand something that they
right.
don't.
And then on that page, they would also have, and the Board of Selectmen, they're responsible to do this, and this is who they are, and this is, so it would talk about different, and here's the link to the page for this group, and so, yeah, having a welcome to Lunenburg page, I think, would be a good thing.
And we know we're missing that when, like, I can't even contact a committee that I'm trying to contact. I went through, like, open space, just trying to make a contact with them, and
Right,
it's not, that data's not there.
right.
Luckily, I think some of that's going to be resolved in the next.
Oh, I think some of it will be resolved, but I think we can also just make sure that some of that stuff actually makes it to it.
Yeah.
Because I don't understand, I don't know now why the town meeting minutes aren't posted, now that I see that other towns do it, so it's, and basically since we.
Well, I think I don't think, I went to open meeting law training in Rutland a few weeks ago. We absolutely have a legal requirement to post those minutes based on the meeting law.
The town meeting.
Yes, they have to be posted.
And they should be. I'm surprised they're not. Are you
Well, they're
sure
probably
not?
posted
I
on
don't
the,
think
they're
they
probably
are.
posted downstairs.
Yeah. like-
They're just not posted online, so that if you don't make it, I mean, I just remember, again, and it is great that the bylaws and the charter are so I mean, I love that document, I love the codification of it. But, I remember first looking for, how does somebody know what the charter says? Like somebody said, oh, I can't be on more than one committee. Where did you find that? I don't know where that is. So, yeah, that's being fixed now, and I think that's excellent. But yeah, I think the educational outreach and then the survey, I think we do the hit with as much information as we can, and then hit with the survey. Depending on when you guys really want to go to town meeting with any changes, because that'll give us time to chew on them. But I'm happy to, again, and actually, if you want, I can probably create a Google spreadsheet and share it. And then that way, if I just start out with a list of all the towns, people can just go in and fill the data when you see it empty, so that you're not looking for the same data that somebody else is. And we have 6 people looking at Shirley,
Yeah.
I just want to say, I don't think it's an awful thing that people don't come. I think it'd be wonderful to get more people at town meeting, but I think the town things are going right, that people are happy. If we were all up in arms and everybody was there might be something wrong. I think it'd be wonderful to get more people. But I think people think, well, things are going well. It's a well-run town, and there was a time maybe when it wasn't. But it seems
Oh, I think that, yeah, there's a lot of truth to that.
that
Yeah, I
things
think-
are actually
Yep.
run well, as far as I'm concerned. And
I agree wholeheartedly. I
So-
think people will let you know when they
I think that's a
complain.
real good point, and maybe what we need to do is figure out a way to identify the difference between apathy and affirmation. If people are happy, that's good.
yeah, I think,
And if we have some way to kind of say, keep on what you're doing, and we can feel comfortable that the majority of the town is feeling that way, that's fine. I don't want anybody to have to leave their Saturday morning activities if they're happy. you know, on one level, on the other,
It'd be
they're
one-
welcome.
Right.
You know.
It'd be great to get people, but I think people are happy with the representation. And
I think so. Being on the planning board, had no idea who actually watches this stuff. And I get a lot of emails, and, they all say the same thing, which is, you guys are doing a great job.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all positive feedback, always. Nothing is really negative. Everything is really, like I said, very positive. I go into Hannaford, people, oh, you're the guy on the planning board.
I think that's great. We're great.
You ask great
We did
questions,
lose quorum. I think that is important to point out, though.
Yeah,
Where people had to leave and call so that we could complete the spring meeting. So
Yeah,
then
I came down,
it's
got
on
the
the
phone call
fringe
and
of
came,
like,
and many of us
is
did, but you're
definitely
right.
needing increase to make sure that that's
Well, the
never
other
gonna
thing
happen.
actually is, it may not be that we need an increase, maybe we need a time, okay, I can give you 3 hours, and whatever you get done in that, great, and anything you don't, okay, then we already have it scheduled for Monday night, we're back here if we don't finish. And then that way, instead of searching for a quorum, maybe people will stop talking so long about, like different items, unless it's something that's really important. But it's not that we didn't have enough people to start.
Right.
There were a good number of people there to start. And I have to say that my first town meeting was when there was an issue with the water,
District?
no, down at the mobile home park. I can't remember what it's called now, but I just remember that the first half of the meeting, before, we had to have a lunch break, when they were talking about what to do about that, getting water in there, was packed. And that's when they voted to renovate the Ritter. And everybody left at lunchtime, and they did not vote to renovate the town hall. And that was my first experience with a town hall, with town meeting, was, ooh, everybody who was here to vote everybody was voting yes to everything in the morning, and then, everything was no in the afternoon, so, because a chunk of people left because their stuff had been addressed. So maybe that's it, you cover all of the, stuff that nobody's interested in first.
It was interesting, we are brainstorming now, but what the hell, we're doing it. There's a school of thought, and certain towns take warrant articles in a lottery fashion. And their trickery, if you will, my word, is to make sure everybody stays for the whole meeting, because they don't know where their hot button issue is gonna be. Now, to me, I don't need trickery, I would much rather have it that,
Right.
people can weigh in on what's important to them, and we don't spend a lot of time on the stuff that's not important to everybody, but everything's important on one level,
Right.
It does keep you on your toes. I like it.
Yeah.
And then,
I go to town, I used to live in televised town meeting live, and if there was a hot issue, people would stay home and watch, and like, the next item on the agenda is gonna be the school budget, and everybody hopped in their car and tore to the school. And then when that vote was over, they were gone.
now we do our articles by number, so places that do this, do they call it like Article A? Like, how do they?
No, they do it by number, but they put all the numbers in a ping pong ball.
Okay,
and they
so you still
pull
have
out and say,
Article
"Okay, now we're gonna do
14, but
number
then okay.
16.
There we go, yeah. Town
I
meeting
know it
bingo.
sounds like trickery, but I think that's not a horrible idea.
I think everybody gets a card, and town meeting bingo is played with numbers, and if you get you get a prize, I think, yeah.
One of the things I think it's starting to hit me is we're going to brainstorm. When we open this to the public, they're going to brainstorm. Everybody's going to have an idea. And I think that some of them have to do with the charter and some of them are just great ideas. And I don't want to lose any of them. So there should be a category that says when we do our categories, that it's not charter related, but it's a real good idea, and we should have somebody, and I'll take responsibility to kind of go through them and say, okay, well, this committee decided it's not ours, but whose is it? And can we go give it to whoever manages the town's website, or whoever manages IT, or whoever, whatever?
Right,
Just so we don't lose the brainstorming ideas,
Yeah, that sounds good.
So, to try to get us back on the thing, there's one on here, F, town Director of Facilities, we haven't talked about at all.
Yeah, so I had mentioned this last week, and what I did was, at our last meeting, and I went and looked at what some of the other towns are doing, because, I mean, you know, we do have a problem in town. We all can see the condition of this building and know that it's a problem. And so I went to look at what other towns do. And I started with cities to see what are the cities doing to help get all their buildings maintained so that they don't fall into this position, and then started working backwards to see, all right, at what point does it start transitioning within towns? And what I found was that there really is no consistency, that some towns do what cities do, and, you know, but typically the cities have a highway department, they'll have a Department of Public Works, and they'll have a Director of Facilities. And in our town, we combine all those roles into one. But most other towns separate them out, and they're all administrative level jobs, managerial level jobs. So I wonder how well, and this isn't anything negative to say about the DPW director, but if I was sitting in his role with what's on his plate, you know, I think you get into the point of prioritization, of what's your top priority, and whether or not, you know, there's enough supplies located in this building certainly doesn't hit, you know, the top of the register, in my opinion, compared to the other issues that are going on in town. So my thought is, you know, that we should look into creating this position of Director of Facilities. I know that the school has their own thing. My thought is really looking at the town buildings, the public safety building, this building, Ritter building, any building other than the schools that's a town building, and this job would basically be almost like a maintenance supervisor / property manager type role, looking at, you know, what are the needs of the building, how do we manage the needs of the building, how do we maintain the needs of the building, and that way there's, you know, a budgeting process in place where they can propose, let's make these changes, we can make these adjustments, and then that kind of goes into, you know, the whole list with capital planning of what, do we have the funds for this or not the funds for this, and I probably said the wrong committee again, but but I think that that's probably, that seems like a good approach. Now, looking at the towns that actually do have this, their buildings are in better condition. I mean, Air is an example. Air is a community, they have a population about 2/3 the size of ours. Their budget is just a little bit less than ours because they have a lot of commercial property, and the condition of their buildings is amazing. Their buildings look great. And it's because they do have, and they only have one custodian, but they have a Director of Facilities who's co-located with the police department in their town and works basically with the fire chief, the police chief, and it maintains all their buildings. And they're responsible for the operational budget of all those buildings, the heating, the lighting, all the other stuff, but also all the improvements. And so when you have that extra person that's working with these department heads, I think it becomes a good way for someone to focus on, you know, these are all tax-funded buildings. If we don't maintain them in the long run, it costs the taxpayers even more. You know, we probably can extend the life of everything that we have if it gets properly maintained. I don't want to get too, you know, verbose here, but, you know, and this kind of seeps into, you know, as a property manager, which is what I do for a living, you know, certainly is a big part of, I understand this fully and totally. If you do not plan for things going wrong, then when things go wrong, now you're competing with other line items, and you may not get the result, and you may end up with a town hall that should have been painted 5 years ago, you know, or something like that.
Yeah, I guess the only question, I thought someone was in that role. That's not true.
So the role, my understanding, and you can correct me on this one, is that it falls all together with DPW director, that all this is part of his role.
I don't know why I thought it was John.
So I have...
Two things. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, one thing I was going to say, you know, listening to the recommendation is to differentiate whether or not it's who or what is in charge of it, or whether or not the funds are available. So I think a lot of things that happen, like a building not being cared for, is even if somebody's in place to take care of them, were the funds allocated to them?
Yeah.
So you could put anybody in charge of anything, and if they don't have money to take care of it and to implement what needs to be done. So it's more, are we whether or not we change to have a facilities manager, are we funding correctly? You know, is the funding available to the person who's currently in charge of the buildings? And I think in some examples it isn't. Like, there's very small amount of funding available for some of the properties, or especially if something were to go wrong. So it not necessarily being a product of who's in charge, but what resources they have.
Yep.
And if we need to look at not adding an employee necessarily, because there's such a tremendous cost to that, that would take even more funding away from the buildings. I mean, I know it's really difficult to add
I can
employees.
talk to Jack. I think it's, my opinion, looking at his job, I think it's too much responsibility of, as far as what falls underneath his role. I think it's both. I think having someone in the role to advocate becomes you advocate. But I think the other side of it is when you're looking at the roads in town, and you're looking at all the buildings in town, and you're looking at, in many ways, stormwater in town, you're going to prioritize those differently than someone who was only looking at building. And so for someone and sitting in Terry's shoes, when one person comes up and says, this is what we can do for schools or roads, and this is what we can do for this, I think it's helpful when you have another person advocating for why these things are critical. So when you're going through that process, it creates another advocacy layer to get these things done. Because right now, I think what's happening is DPW understands what his limitations are, and he also knows that we all care about our roads being salted and all these things that we really matter. So on his level, and I haven't spoken to him in much depth about this, but I imagine that on his level, if he's looking at all the things that are on his plate, that whether or not the town hall needs to get painted is probably lower on the priority list than do we have enough sand going into this winter? Whereas someone who's sitting in the role of looking at these buildings, that's probably the highest thing on their agenda item, and the lowest is, the type of paper that we're using in our buildings, something like that.
Couple things, one is to clear up a few things. One is our current situation has the town-owned properties are the responsibility of DPW, and the school-owned properties are under the responsibility of the Director of School Facilities, which is John Londa. So that is one separation. And frankly, as buildings move back and forth between who owns them, the operational money to run them doesn't usually go with it. And that's just an aside, but that's what happens. Our budgeting, to Katie's point, and I agree with what you said, is we fund very carefully capital when we build a new building, and we separate it and say it's capital, and we get it approved at all the right places, including town meeting when it needs to, and we spend it and we build it, but we don't capitalize any other building related expenses unless they're reactive repairs. We have to paint the senior center, or we have to paint the town hall, and it has to go before the capital planning committee, and it has to get prioritized with fire engines and everything else on the list. And I think that I agree with what you're saying, and what a director of facilities may do is create a budget that is just for that. Who actually, who manages it is probably important, but it's not as important as a budget that includes a preventative maintenance, or even that word I don't like, an ongoing investment that isn't reactive. And what I'd like to use an example, because I'm actually supporting both of what you just said, is pavement management used to be, we'll come up with as much as we can possibly come up with each year. We'll throw it towards pavement management, but we know it's a losing cost. We know it costs $1 million to keep our roads where they need to be, but we're going to give you $400,000. And then the next year, we know it's $1.5 million because we ignored it last year, but we're only going to give you $400,000. And the next year, and that's how you get where we got, all right? And I'm very proud of the fact that the town recently said, no, we're going to have a debt exclusion, we're going to fix what we did in the past, and we're going to dedicate a certain amount of capital money going forward that's coming out of the excise tax. And at some point, and I think it's designed to coincide when the debt exclusion runs out and when we've accumulated enough increase in the operating capital plan, that it comes to a point where we can maintain our roads through the operating plan with earmarked money, that we don't take it away when we need a fire truck, or we take it away when we need to paint the town hall, or whatever the case may be. And I think what you're saying, and tell me if I missed it, is that kind of focus is what we're talking about, not necessarily, I don't care what department the facilities manager lives in.
Yeah.
It's a focus where that person's job is to take the middle high school and make sure it looks just as good 50 years from now as it does today.
Exactly. And I think the other thing is, as you come up with it, what I found in these job descriptions is most of these positions require the person to be a contractor of some kind, so that they're on the property, they're there 40 hours a week, and maybe this isn't the week where they're doing some of the budgeting stuff, and maybe this is the week where they're getting on a ladder and painting a building. And so you're providing that ready resource, available for the town. Whereas right now, that expertise is over in the building inspection department, and, I don't think we expect the building inspector to have to actually do any contracting work. So I think it does, in my view, I think this is something that we need. I think a reasonable amount of communities are doing this and are going this way, and all the cities, of course, and larger communities have this position specifically.
I was just thinking, before we went to that point, is there a way to look at improving like the funding and the structure within the current, utilizing the current employees and the current, I'm just thinking back to, really how complex it is to add employees and how expensive it is. And I remember going through all the budget hearings, and that the fire chief hopes for a paramedic, or that we have a part-time fire department, and the low number of patrol officers, and thinking of adding an employee.
Yeah, where does the town want to put that first, right?
And is there not other employees that are necessary? And how, when I was doing my advocating, I went back and I would study not just the budget hearing I was going to, but I'd watch several years back, and I'd pull old budgets just to sort of really understand what it was I was asking for or hoping for. And it can be a lot of work to add employees to departments, and I know the school goes through that too. So I really agree with everything you're saying, and I think that's absolutely what we need in terms of taking care of buildings. But can we, I feel like more of it's resolved by making sure the funding's available.
Well, also,
I feel like sometimes it isn't.
Yeah, well, it hardly ever is. And that's why the capital planning committee puts forward, like they'll have a couple $1 million in requests and 600,000 in approval. But the other question I have is, did you check with Jack to find out if he's got somebody who's assigned to those functions?
Jack and I we're supposed to talk tomorrow.
Okay.
But
Yeah, I would ask him, because I thought that there was somebody.
He does have a couple of people on his staff
Yeah, he does.
who's at least a part of their job is facilities.
I thought there was somebody who was primarily.
And John does as well, and so I don't think it necessarily, first of all, I'm not sure it's this committee's job to figure out how many people they need, but I don't think it needs to translate to an ad. There are people doing facilities work right now, it's a matter of focus. And
Focus and function, yeah.
I agree that it's probably hard to add a totally new function that we don't do, but to reorganize functions that's currently being done in several places and do it in a different way is not that difficult to do if you know what you're trying to accomplish.
Right, but I think, conversely, I understand your point that if Jack is the one that's presenting and prioritizing how these things are coming before the capital planning committee, he may be prioritizing some things that a building person.
Well, the nature of the way it's laid out,
right.
it's reactive right now, it's not proactive.
Right, it's boilers, yeah.
That's not a knock at Jack or John.
Right, absolutely.
It's reactive. They're dealing with.
Yeah, and I'm sorry,
roofs and
yeah,
roofs and-
I don't think I meant to say John, I think it was, is Jim?
There's Kit and,
Unless there's somebody who
I think there's a-
retired or something,
no,
but,
what's his name? Oh, geez.
but I thought that there was someone who was like the equivalent of John for the,
Bro.
yeah, I think it's Jim Bro.
Bro?
I think so.
Okay,
Yeah, but it's like the equivalent of John for town buildings, but I would double check that, and I don't know what other responsibilities he has, but yeah, I understand your point. And whether or not a new position is identified, or do they tend to put it in their charter?
that I don't know.
Okay.
And I don't know if that's a chartered, I noticed that we'd had.
I think the
certain-
charter issue has to do with what buildings are we talking about and can it cross charter lines?
Yeah.
I think who does it and how they do it and where their money comes from is kind of an operational thing, but well, where the money comes from might be a charter thing. But it's, how do you cross lines? Can you take money out of an operational school budget and an operational town budget and put it together to manage facilities regardless of what goes on in that building? That might be a charter issue.
Yeah.
And can one person be responsible for the execution of a long-term building facilities plan, even if they don't climb the ladder? That may be a charter issue.
Okay.
But who paints the buildings and where the money goes once it's appropriated may not be a charter issue.
Okay.
Is that a fair?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're nowhere on that, so. But you'll talk to Jack tomorrow and find out if there's...
I will.
I mean, certainly identifying the function, I think, is, but yeah, I'd have to take another look at the, I wasn't looking at the charter for that, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think the general consensus, from everyone I've talked to is that, we all like DPW. I think that they do a great job.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It's just a matter of how do you get all the things on their plate to get accomplished, and have we grown to the point now where we have to start pulling something out of them and putting it somewhere else?
Well, I think it was good. I mean, at least last year, Jack finally got to replace a position that he'd had years ago and had lost. So, I think he was...
But I think by definition, DPW is reactive.
Right.
When it snows, they plow it. When a pothole, they fix it. And that's why I use the pavement management as kind of a step into being proactive and planning and saying, we're going to get ahead of it.
And a lot of that is project management because they hire contractors and subcontractors to do a lot of work even on the buildings. So it's not like direct work, so. Yeah, it's an interesting question. But yeah, something about it, certainly, and I don't know, I mean, infrastructure is just an issue. It's a long-term issue. And it's not just buildings, it's pipes and stuff. It's like things that will go wrong eventually and potentially have a potential liability for the town.
Right, I'm thinking last night too, like not just buildings, but parks, but everything, like
Right.
where do you, it's, yeah.
Right, and people, saying, yeah, we just don't have enough open lands for, like soccer fields or something. Well, unfortunately, we have a lot of water. It's water polo.
I feel like it all goes
polo
back to
teams.
funding.
Oh, everything, yeah. And that's another thing with, and that's why, I think for the finance committee, or for me, on the finance committee, having some better sense of what the town identifies as a priority, because when you hear from the department, I mean, everything's a priority, and everything is a priority, and you can, make an argument for every single thing, you just don't have the money to fund it, so.
And we never will. I mean, I don't think that, if you're functioning as a government, you got plenty of money, you're taxing your people way too much, right? So, I mean, I think it's always this constant struggle of never having the enough resources. But it's just about, I guess priorities, larger priorities.
Okay.
Okay, H says designate small group tasks.
Are we skipping G, town clerk?
Well, no, I think we talked about that one. We should point
We were
it
going to
out.
basically on the
talked
town
about,
surveys, finding
We
out.
talked about day-to-day versus policy versus operations, and we talked about whether it's appointed or elected, and that applies in both cases to the town clerk position. And I think we've already said that that's one of the things we very definitely want to.
Yeah, we'd put that on the spreadsheet.
Right.
That's one of the,
Right. Now, I
question
believe
we
we'll
wanted.
have to bear this out with our survey data, but I think there's a trend towards appointed, is what the understanding is, and we have to prove and see if that's true.
right, I don't know. And I don't, again,
Do you
that's
sense
another one.
that trend from just general conversation?
Right, yeah, that's the issue is, how do you identify a trend?
Bob gave me a note.
I think I can answer that one because I think I think he is right on that one. I looked at, I think, Tingsboro. I'm not going to be able to list all of them, but I looked around 4 communities. All of them had appointed town clerks.
Really?
And is there a,
Now, I personally really support our town clerk being elected. I think I mentioned that. I'm going to be hard to move away from elected on this one, because I see a lot of benefits to the town clerk being
I
an
like
elected
elected
position.
too, 'cause-
But I think the trend is for it to move into appointed.
And maybe it's a function of talking about the duties of a town clerk. And maybe there's some duties that work better under an appointed person and some duties work better under an elected person. And we're thinking about the one we have right now as opposed to, you know, maybe we need to dissect it and put it back together again.
Yeah.
And then it makes sense to everybody. I don't know.
I think the one we have now has had more elections in town than anyone else, right? And she's been there since the
No,
70s.
and remember, just to reinforce, because this is the first time we're on TV, what we're saying here is not personal to Kathy. You know, anything we would do would go into
Yeah.
effect with our next town clerk. But the thought is, there is a trend, or there's at least a discussion in most towns on whether that should be an appointed position
can
with a
we,
boss, or an elected position with the whole town as the boss. And also the duties that are done, whether they're operationally or policy setting.
can we change it in the charter if we're not actually going to apply it to one particular
Yeah,
person?
you could just
Yes.
say when it's, yeah.
Next
Once the
time
current,
vacant,
yeah.
Or whatever.
Once the current holder retires,
Right.
and she'd still be
Wouldn't it just go
entitled.
to the next election?
Well, she would still be entitled to continue with elections. It would, my understanding that the way this could be worded is that the current holder could continue to go through the election process, but once she vacates the office, basically,
I don't know
or,
how that
That's-
would legally work,
I know,
because
'cause
then
then
you're
you're-
saying, we'll have elections so long as she's gonna be one of the candidates.
Or is-
I don't feel like we
Yeah.
can change it
We'll
without
have
changing
We'll have
it.
town council help us. with
Yeah,
that.
I don't
But
see
you
how that
can-
would work.
You can grandfather
yeah.
people.
Up until an election, probably, but then it,
Well, we'll
No,
find the.
Well, no, well, I mean, basically, it would really depend, because if she lost the election, then how do you then now
that next
appoint?
person can't get it. And
You
thank
know.
you, you won, and we're done.
Yeah. So, no, it's
there's
town
more
council
information for this. I
Yeah.
agree. It is a town council question, because I do understand, it is a complex way that this can work, but certainly it has happened. Other communities have done this with positions when they switch over to being from elected to appointed. This is something that's done numerous times, but it does get a little bit weird when you do, you know, either whether you appoint them right then and there and say you're appointed until you retire, or you consider them to be an elected official with no
That's more the
interim.
direction I think it would have to head in, is
Yeah.
we're appointing and you're
Or you
our
put them
appointee.
through another,
We'll get town council to give us the
Yeah.
legal answer.
yeah.
Yeah,
Or
and
you
in the
could-
meantime, really, I think it's really a discussion, or somebody has to identify what the functions are. Yeah, and I mean, I know some of them, but I don't know all of them. And really, yeah. Okay.
And I'd also want
Skip
to,
over it.
I would want to identify too, not what's trendy, but what would be our motive for doing it. Like, not really worrying about what everybody else is doing, but really saying, like, this is a clear choice to change in a charter, and why would we do it? What would we benefit? What would we gain, or what would we lose?
Right, that's why I'd wanna see what the functions are.
To keep it more specifically,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think Mr. Toll indicated some of this. You know, I've had this conversation with Ms. Herrick and with Mr. Eversole. I support the position being elected, but I think I do understand why the idea is for it to be an appointed position, which is, you know, how do you make this person accountable on a day-to-day basis, you know, to someone, as far as the functioning of their jobs. You know, when you're in a town, you have a position who's elected, but their roles are so critical to the functioning of the town, so critical to compliance, that, you know, you have to wait 3 years if they're doing something wrong, but in the process, that's lawsuits, that's a whole bunch of other stuff. And I think that that's kind of I support it being elected.
No, I know.
But that's kind of, I think, the mindset is to make it an accountable to a boss type role, and the boss being someone that's physically present, not just the community at large.
Okay. It goes into a lot of theory then too, when you analyze any position that's elected and who are they accountable to, and it's the people. And I think that's a healthy
But this
place
is
to
a
place
paid
accountability.
position with employees and day-to-day
Yeah.
responsibilities, so
Well,
it's
most,
slightly different than.
in the town level, you are a volunteer, but generally elected officials at state and federal are also employees
Right,
of
like the mayor.
something. So I think a lot of times elected people outside of town become an employee of some sort, and then the accountability is with the people, and I think when things are with the people, that's how democracy was intended.
Right, again, I'll just go back to, I want to look at the functions, and I want to see how much of it is that this person is also part of if part of their function is to hold elected officials accountable, then I would probably want them to continue as an elected official. If their function is not that type of function, then, yeah, I wouldn't feel as strongly that way, so. And I have to say, until I see the functions, I don't feel particularly strongly. But that's Jamie's job.
All right. The last two, H and number 6 kind of talk about next steps. Small group tasks and continuing our communication, input gathering, et cetera. Until we do some categorization and until we have a full 9-person complement, I suggest we hold off on small group tasks. And maybe we can begin to do that next meeting, or maybe we do the categorization and then break up the small group tasks after we know what the buckets are.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
I agree.
Okay. Which brings us to pretty much the end. Before we close with a public comment or concerns, our next meeting is scheduled for October 25th. There is a ZBA meeting scheduled, which is normally here, so it's here. So we'll be in the Ritter. Okay, at 7 o'clock, which means we won't be live televised, but we will continue to record and have it available on YouTube.
Okay. And I will, before the next meeting, at least get the spreadsheet up with the town list, so if people are out there surveying stuff. And if you find that you want to add a category
Okay?
of information, then just throw it on the spreadsheet. And, but it will be a Google Doc, and I will share that.
Great. Any public comment? I just want to thank you again. This is hard work, and we're gonna continue to slide into brainstorming. And I think my suggestion, you should probably check with the chair, but maybe you can make an agenda item for brainstorming so that we kind of collect them in one place and write them down as a brainstorm, and then try to force everything else into a task or a category or whatever, that is ours to get an answer to. The others we'll try to hand off to somebody that might use that input. But, Bob may feel different.
Okay.
Could I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.